Time Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul, my co-host Justin Baker, joining me via Skype as we dive in to part 2 of the Central Division preview as we jump into the Minnesota Wild, the Nashville Predators, the St. Louis Blues, and the Winnipeg Jets. If you missed part 1, where we go through Chicago, Colorado, Dallas, then you should probably go back and look at those. So, wait, who else did we do in there? I feel like I'm missing somebody. Who am I missing?
The Central Division?
Oh, Arizona. They're just so forgetful. They're just so forgetful that, easy to forget about Arizona. I knew there was someone else that we did in there. But yeah, you can check that out as well. We did the entire Pacific Division in a couple of parts, so you can go check that out. But to start the show today, we're going to jump into the Minnesota Wild, and pretty recent news. We actually this is good timing to do this show because Kaprizov, of course, gets done. They sign him to a 5-year, $9 million a year deal. So Kaprizov, a Minnesota Wild for quite some time. To start it off, what do you think of the Kaprizov deal?
Oh my! First off, I'm going to say, don't get me wrong. I think the guy is very, very talented, and he's going to have a lot of success in this league. But with a sample size of only 55 games, and to give a guy $9 million, I know the rumors were running that he was apparently going to get offered like $10 million in the KHL, which literally would have been a whole entire team's salary cap over there.
Right.
But I mean, you know what? I would have been okay if they had done, a 2 or 3 year deal at this. The only concern I have is obviously it kind of makes things a little bit more difficult for next year because for those who aren't familiar, obviously Zach Parise and Ryan Suter got bought out. The salary cap this year, or the salary cap hit this year for both of those guys, is only $2.3 million. But next year and the 2 years following, it's going to be $6.3 million and then some. So
right next year, it looks like they've got, just 16 million in projected space, but that is Goligoski is a UFA. They're going to have to re-sign Kevin Fiala. Victor Rask is gone. I mean, as rough as it is with those salaries coming back in, there's not a whole lot that they have to do. They don't have a whole lot of high-priced contracts to begin with. So,
no, but the other concern is, right, so obviously Kevin Fiala is going to look at this deal and say, well, Kaprizov wasn't even a point-per-game player, and you know what? Hey, I was pretty much not as close, but I was pretty close to his pace as far as production's concerned, and I'm still the guy put up 20 goals last year, so he's going to be probably looking for somewhere north of 7.5, I would assume. Yeah,
absolutely. I would think that there's no way he gets less than 7. Especially because he's 25 years old. So I think that he's got one more year of RFA status, and then he could be a UFA. So now you're going to buy UFA years.
Right, exactly. So that might even cost you more money, right? And then you got to look at Jordan Greenway as well. He's still a very productive middle six guy for them. And at 24 years old, he's going to want, I would assume they're going to try to get a bridge deal done with him too. But yeah, I would think $4 million plus for a guy like that. So you look at those two contracts combined, and you're getting pretty close, with signing, assuming they sign, they'll have 4 defensemen on contract next year. So now you got to get a couple more guys signed, and I'm assuming they'll probably bring in another guy to round out their top 4. So that's going to push it to that $16 million easy. And then you look at the goaltending position, and Kaapo Kähkönen is going to need a new deal.
And have you seen the deals that some goaltenders are getting, like Cal Peterson signing for $5 million a year for the next 3 years? Right. I mean, that's goaltenders are starting to get paid too. I think your one saving grace is going to be Ken Marco Rossi, who was their 9th overall pick last year. It's looking like he, I would probably be disappointing if he doesn't make the team, at least to get a little, like the first 9 games of the year, before that 10th game kicks in, that he makes this team and gets the opportunity. That's going to be what they need. And if they can get Rossi, at a decent production level on his ELC, I mean, that'll be massive for the Minnesota Wild and what they'll have moving forward. If you have an impact player in your top six who's making $925,000 or $894,000, whatever, then that's a huge win, and that may be the case for the Minnesota Wild. So, if that happens, that kind of makes up for maybe a Victor Rask leaving or some of that big salary of Kirill Kaprizov. But $9 million in the end, if he can do again what he did over the course of 82 games, you're not mad about $9 million. I mean, he was more than just, it was more than the points for Kaprizov. I mean, he came in and this team was changed. Do you disagree?
Yeah, no, I'll give you that. I think there was a new attitude. It's almost like they became the Vegas Golden Knights of the Mid North, or
Right. Yeah. Some different vibe about them that all of a sudden it was like, okay, the Minnesota Wild, like they're for real.
Yeah, I enjoyed watching them, and I had my doubts going into this year, and I completely agree with you. I think, again, if the production stays where it is, the $9 million is totally worth it. I just have issues giving guys big money like this early in their career with a small sample size like he has. Now, the other concern I have for Minnesota is obviously their lack of a number one center. You mentioned Marco Rossi's name, him coming off, not having skated at all last year. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be in the position to fill that role now. Maybe a couple years down the road, yes. But right now, Joel Eriksson-Ek looks like the guy that they're going to go to. And, for me, I don't feel great about him being my number one. But
then again, Vegas's number one is Chandler Stevenson. So
right. Yeah, exactly. So I think this team as a whole, I think they're good enough to compete in this division for sure.
Yeah. And you got to look, this team isn't necessarily built. They're not built with a ton of star forwards outside of, like, of course, Kirill Kaprizov comes out of nowhere and changes the fortunes of this franchise. But really, the place they were building from is the back end, right? Like Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, Matt Dumba. You've got those three guys. They're locked up. And then they go and they pull in Alex Goligoski, Dmitry Kulikov, and to a lesser extent, a Jordy Ben. And they're, the back half of their back end kind of short up a little bit. I mean, Alex Goligoski, not the same player that he was when Pittsburgh's winning the Stanley Cup by any means, but he is still someone who's going to put up 30-plus points in the regular season. And, he's a great guy to have on that second power play. He can play in the top four. You can move him down into that bottom pairing. And Dmitry Kulikov is just good depth, good bottom pairing guy. I like what they were able to do from a free agent standpoint outside of Kaprizov re-signing, along with bringing in Frederick Gaudreau, who had a really nice year for the Pittsburgh Penguins in limited minutes. I mean, 19 games, he had 10 points. And in the playoffs, he had 3 points in 6 games. So, maybe Frederick Gaudreau in his, he's 28 years old now, kind of hitting his stride a little bit after having a lot of time in the AHL. I mean, this is a guy who consistently put up 40-plus points in the AHL and then really given it he played 55 games in Nashville in 2018-19, only had 4 points. Last year, he gets a decent opportunity with Pittsburgh and is able to produce a little bit. So we'll see if that deal, him coming in and maybe playing in the bottom 6 for sure, if he can go and maybe put up 25, 30 points, that would be a big thing for them as well. And then, of course, you got to like them getting Nick Bjugstad. That's
yeah.
I mean, he's there last year. Here again, he put up 17 points. He's probably somebody who you could count on for close to 40 points. They're getting it done from in terms of their bottom 6. Like there's no shortage of depth for this team, and I think that's what I like most about them outside of a Kaprizov. I like Kaprizov the most.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, listen, if Gaudreau, Bjugstad getting in at a really cheap contract, and between those two guys and Victor Rask, I think they have plenty of depth down the center position as far as maybe your 2, 3, 4. Assuming that they want to slot in Victor Rask maybe at that number 2 spot behind Joel Eriksson-Ek. But regardless, I think if you put any combination of these three guys in your bottom six at the center position, you're looking at it and you're saying, okay, we're going to do really well. I think they're set there. And so, again, you talk about the depth, and really when it comes down to crunch time, when you're competing in the playoffs and going deep, having that depth down the middle there is going to be very, very valuable. Yeah,
I guess now that Kaprizov's been signed, to me the biggest question is, well, twofold. You got to ask, was last year kind of a fluke? Like, did they overperform? Did Kaprizov overperform? Which, therefore, the rest of the team overperform? And then you look at really the biggest loss of the offseason is losing Ryan Suter, who they chose to lose. They bought him out. Ken is bringing in Alex Goligoski, Kulikov, and Jordy Ben. Kind of almost like, yeah, we lost one guy, but we can bring in three. Is that going to be enough to fill the minutes that he was able to go out there and play? I mean, he could still play 28 minutes a game, and now suddenly your D-core is that's going to have to be spread out amongst all six players. I mean, not that you're worried about Dumba or Spurgeon, but is that going to be enough? Because Ryan Suter was still an effective player.
Yeah, I think obviously you're probably going to see a few more minutes out of their top three guys, and that top pairing is Spurgeon and Brodin is definitely going to get close to 28 minutes a night, I would assume at this point. And obviously Dumba is going to get in there probably close to 23, 24 minutes a night as well. So between those three guys, I think I feel really confident going in if you're the Minnesota Wild, saying, hey, we got a good group of defenders here. And then again, when you look beyond that, Goligoski, if he still has something left in the tank, obviously he's on a 1-year deal, so he's looking to say, hey, I can still play. And, if he can perform anywhere close to what he did last year, I think they'll be all right.
All right. Let's move on to the Nashville Predators, who they made at least one big splash. I think that you could consider a big splash as they bring in Cody Glass from the Vegas Golden Knights, as they're kind of involved in that little three-way trade. And Cody Glass, I mean, there was a need for a talented forward, someone up front, a centerman who could come in and do something interesting here. And I think that is, that's probably their biggest addition. I know they brought in Philippe Myers, David Rittich, but a lot of players headed out. I mean, Victor Arvidsson, Ryan Ellis, Pekka Rinne retires, Calle Jarnkrok, and Eric Haula all out for the Nashville Predators. And this team is, for all intents and purposes, in my opinion, has begun some sort of a rebuild. Yeah, are we in rebuild mode, or are we in like maybe we'll just like kind of see what happens here? What's going on with the Predators from your standpoint?
Yeah, I think if you're David Poile, you're not saying the word rebuild, but I think slowly you're going to start bringing in maybe pieces and almost doing like a slow exchange, right? You're going to slowly, get rid of a couple guys, bring in a couple new fresh faces, so it doesn't look like a complete rebuild, but you're doing it slowly, right? Because, first I look at obviously the retirement of Pekka Rinne. I think that's a huge loss in the locker room. But now I think for UC Saros, it's officially his net, right? Sure. I mean, he was fantastic last year. He gets the extension. $5 million for the next 4 years is going to be good for him. They're going to be setting goal, obviously, what they do in the backup position. Maybe David Rittich comes in and has sort of a rejuvenation.
Yeah, Rittich is, I think we know what Rittich is, right? Like he's right. Like a 900 somewhere. I mean, I know 4 games with the Leafs, he wasn't great. But other than that, he's basically like a 905, maybe a little bit better in terms of save percentage. It is really funny. His like one playoff appearance in the NHL. I think he only played like for a period, but his goals against average is 9.99 because he only played one game, and his save percentage is .667. So hopefully the Predators don't have to use him in the playoffs, if that's any indication. Yeah. So I mean, Predators bring in Philippe Meyer, who he's coming over from Philadelphia. I think he was in that Cody Glass trade as well. And I mean, he's likely going to play in that top 4 along with Roman Josi, Ekholm, and like a Dante Fabro. So it'll be interesting to see what they can kind of piece together, because they don't have a lot of depth defensively, something we're not used to saying with the Predators. And I don't see how this year produce as much in terms of just a really good team. I just don't see it happening unless maybe an Eeli Tolvanen really picks it up and goes ham and becomes what we thought. If Matt Duchene has a year where he's able to come in and really prove that he's worth that $8 million a year. I mean, what do we need to see from Matt Duchene? Like he had 13 points in 34 games, which is basically good for like a 30-point season at $8 million. I'm maybe he can pull off a 55-point season, and you'd be happy.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think ideally they would like to see him get 50 points. Ideally, they would like to see Ryan Johansson get back to maybe 70 points too. But I'm doubtful for both of these guys just because the way the system is set up, the way, they lose Victor Arvidsson, they lose Ryan Ellis, they lose all these offensive cogs on their team. And I think it's really going to hurt them in the long run. I mean, obviously,
it's going to hurt them in the short run.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But I think long term, right? Because you have these, again, we talked about it. It's not officially a rebuild on paper, but I think they're slowly moving guys out, and obviously they've got these 2 contracts here that are going to be, difficult to move, and so they're going to be stuck with them. And now you've got Philip Forsberg, who's going to be a UFA, and he can essentially leave town after this year if he thinks that Nashville's not going anywhere. If they do any worse than they did last year, I mean, it'll be easy for him to say, okay, well, you know what? I don't like the way this team's going. Everybody's getting old. I mean, you've got Roman Josi getting past 30, Ekholm's past 30, and he's going to need an extension too, so they could lose him for nothing.
Well, I got to think Ekholm is going. Ekholm is going to be, I mean, last year at the deadline, everyone thought he'd go. And now, I mean, there's no way that Ekholm finishes the season as a Predator, I don't think. I don't think Forsberg will either.
Well, I don't think so either, because look, if you look at what, okay, they lose Ryan Ellis, they lose potentially, a Philip Forsberg too on top of Ekholm this year. I mean, that would be detrimental to this team, and then you would have to officially say, okay, well, we've got to start a rebuild here at this point, because listen, Forsberg can go out and say, I mean to Nashville what Kaprizov means to Minnesota right now in terms of just that offensive firepower, that spark that team has, and he's basically it between him and Roman Josi. And so Forsberg could easily command $9 million from Nashville.
I don't know about 9. I don't know. Well, he doesn't score the same amount of goals, right? Like
if you have Duchene and Johansson getting $8 million, Forsberg can easily make the argument, I deserve $9 million.
That's true. I don't know. Would you pay $9 million a year for Philip Forsberg?
I mean, if you're Nashville, you really can't afford to lose him. Because that's the problem, right? You got a guy who put up 32 points.
If you want to win,
games.
Yeah. If you still want to try to win now, I agree. Right. Yeah, you got to try and re-sign him. But what could you get for him? You could probably get first round pick, prospect, and a roster player or something. But it's I mean, there's not a whole lot they can do. I mean, they need to hope that a lot of players have bounce back years, and they might. Like, this Predators team sort of reminds me of the Calgary Flames a little bit. Like, you look at their team and you go, yeah, they could all have a bounce back year, and they could be great. I mean, Roman Josi can win the Norris Trophy. Saros could be in the Vezina conversation, and suddenly this is a team that's in the playoffs. But they could also finish a dead last in the division.
They really could.
They could be in the playoffs. They could finish dead last. This is the most from what I can see. I don't know that there's a team in the NHL that has a bigger ceiling to basement ratio. Like, I don't know where they're going to go. I don't know what they're going to do or what they're going to look like. It's my hunch is that this team's they're pretty middling, and if they're 10 points out of the playoffs come deadline time, then Forsberg and Ekholm are gone, and then they really start to fall out, and they finish somewhere where they get a top 8 draft pick. That's my prediction in terms of this team. That's where I would lean.
Yeah, and maybe that's best for this team, right? Maybe you just keep Cody Glass in the minors. Maybe you don't bring him up at all, and you just say, hey, we're kind of tanking, because obviously Cody Glass isn't the answer as far as the number one center is concerned, and he's not the answer to say, Forsberg, we're bringing in some elite talent here. We're going to be pretty good here soon. So
no, but he could come up and play a third line center role and be given some responsibility. I don't know if it behooves him to play in the AHL again, especially after playing 27 games with Vegas, 39 the year before. Like, he's ready for the NHL, and so I would be very surprised if he ends up playing in the minors. But I think that probably your best bet with him is to not play him at center and to put him on the wing, and then move him to center if you want to. Or move him to center if you end up moving someone out. Because you don't really need him at center. I mean, you've got Duchesne, you've got Ryan Johansson, you have Nick Cousins. You've got a lot of guys who can play center. You don't need him to play center. He can take faceoffs on his off wing. You can put him into situations where he can do well. But I think if you just put him on the wing, where the Predators, frankly, are pretty weak on the wing, I think that maybe he's in a better spot to go out and do something. But we'll see what they do.
Yeah.
We'll see what they do. Any final thoughts on Nashville before we skip off onto the St. Louis Blues?
I guess my one question is, besides Forsberg and Ekholm potentially getting moved this year, do you think that the Nashville Predators finally unload either Duchesne or Johansson's contracts at all?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't see it. I mean, when it comes to Johansson, I think he's kind of right in that, like, he's a 40-point player, maybe 45, and maybe in a good year he could be a 50-point guy if he can put up enough helpers. That's really the problem, is that he's not much of a goal scorer. He's like, I'm going to score 14 goals. He scored 14 goals 3 different times in the last 4 years, not counting last year where he had 7. But I don't see it. And Matt Duchesne, I don't think that there's the same kind of desire for Matt Duchesne anymore. He's really kind of fallen off the map. 6 goals in 34 games. I mean, you're looking at a guy who's going to score you 12 goals, maybe 15 goals, and he's really not doing much from a helper standpoint. He's not great in terms of pushing possession. Matt Duchesne, largely a bust for the Predators. I mean, just David Poile, you can talk all you want, like, oh, he wants to not rebuild and he wants to go at this. I mean, he put all his eggs in a Duchesne Johansson basket, and that was foolish. And he's paying for it. Like, it's the reason why he is never going to win a Stanley Cup now, sadly. One of the best general managers ever. I don't think he's ever won a cup, right?
Nope.
Maybe the best general manager in the history of the league without a Stanley Cup. Like, he'll probably be in the Hockey Hall of Fame, even though he's never won a Stanley Cup. But anywho,
tragic.
Nashville Predators, most surprising player? Who do you got?
Ooh.
Is there anyone on there that like you think could blow you away?
Yeah, I think we might be surprised by Dante Fabro this year. I think now with Ryan Ellis gone, I think Fabro is poised to take some big minutes here and really see what he can bring to the table.
Okay, Dante Fabro. I'm going Eeli Tolvanen. 22 points in 40 games last year, 11 goals. I think that he could potentially put up 25 plus goals and put up 50 points, which would be huge for the Preds. So,
and at $1.4 million.
Yeah, for the next 3 years, which would be great for them if they could pull that off, because they need someone to step it up that's not making a lot of money, because God knows the people making a lot of money aren't going to do it. Okay, St. Louis Blues adding a couple significant players, Pavel Buchnevich and Brendan Saad to the St. Louis Blues, but they lose Sammy Blais. A big hurt, Jaden Schwartz goes to Seattle, and Mike Hoffman heads over to the Montreal Canadiens. But despite a couple nice additions, hurtful subtractions, there's one player who I think everyone's going to be focused on, and that is Tarasenko. Is he going to get traded before training camp? It doesn't look like it. It looks like he's going to start the year with the Blues, which is shocking. And what's going to happen with this saga of Tarasenko? Like, a guy that clearly doesn't want to be there is going to be forced into playing. What does this year look like for Tarasenko and the Blues?
Yeah, I think he's probably going to have a sit down and listen. I think management, Doug Armstrong, Berube, is going to say, hey, you know what? Go out there, play your butt off and basically show us that you're still that point per game, that elite goal scorer that every team in this league wants. And if you can do that for us, if you can produce, there's going to be a line of suitors around the door, and we'll be able to trade you that much easier. And I think, obviously St. Louis doesn't want him to go. I'm not sure what the relationship's like. I'm not going to, speculate and say that, oh, you know what, it's mendable or it's completely broken. There's no repairing it at this point. And so I think the smart thing to do for both parties would be for him to go out and play his butt off and play really, really well. So one, more teams will be willing to take on his contract, and two, St. Louis can get more out of him.
Yeah, I mean, if he plays really well, I don't think they're going to trade him.
Well, no, they don't want to trade him, but eventually he might get to a point where he says, you know what, when am I going to get traded? If you don't start this process soon, I'm just going to start half-assing it. I mean, I don't think any hockey player would come right out and say that.
But what happens if the St. Louis Blues are in first place in the Central or second place in the Central? You think he's going to want to leave? You think that maybe winning cures a lot of things.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And you know what? The atmosphere might be part of the problem, right? That's why Ryan O'Reilly left Buffalo. So maybe, I doubt that's the case here in St. Louis, but maybe he's just not enjoying himself, and winning, like you said, typically cures that. So now he's having fun. He's enjoying his time with his teammates. And maybe he says, you know what? Cool. I'll wait it out this year. We're doing very well. Let's see where this goes. Because, again, this team, if they get in the playoffs, you never know what could happen with this team. So they could potentially make another run.
Yeah. And, they've filled in their locker room. Like, I like Kyle Clifford coming in there. I like that they were able to bring back Tyler Bozak on basically a league minimum deal. You got to like that despite losing Jaden Schwartz, that they were able to kind of patch it together, bring in Buchnevich and Saad, which I think that this team has been weak on the wing without Tarasenko. So, if Tarasenko isn't at full health, which who knows how that shoulder is, I like that they've kind of shored up the wings as well. Robert Thomas signing a nice bridge deal, $2.8 million a year for the next 2 years. That's a fantastic deal. I think it's a good deal for Robert Thomas, who kind of had a down year last year. But if he can get back to, a couple years ago where he put up 42 points in 66 games, I mean, that's a 50-point season. If he can put that up over those 2 years, he would certainly get paid, but that $2.8 million would look great. And that, I think, is what the Blues need. They need somebody who is, again, a lot like Nashville, like just down the lineup to really produce, somebody who's not making a lot of money. That, and of course, we can jump over to the defensive side of things, and you don't have to look further than the two latest additions in Justin Falk and Torrey Krug. These two guys need to be the players that they thought they were bringing in, right?
Yeah, and you know what? I like both of their games. Are phenomenal to me. Torrey Krug, I thought, was very, very good for St. Louis last year. I think, maybe he can produce a little bit more, but maybe that's part of getting comfortable in with the team. But, Falk, I would like to see a little bit more out of him as far as offensive production. But, again, I think if between, those two guys, Parenko and Scandella, I think they've got a solid top four here that can compete with just about any team in the league. And, you know what? They're obviously all right there in that 28 to 31-year-old window. And so I think they're still in the good years, right? So they're not on the wrong side of 30 yet. And so I think they've got a solid D core back there. And with the little added grit up front, and if Jordan Binghamton can keep up some decent numbers here, I think they've got a really good chance of, being a good defensive team this year again.
Yeah, and when you look at Jordan Binnington, he did have his, statistically speaking, his worst year as a St. Louis Blue. I mean, that .910 save percentage, which is still fine, but we're used to seeing a little bit better out of him. And I mean, really, the biggest question mark is going to be, can he do it in the playoffs again? I mean, so good in 18-19 when they won the Cup, and since then has not been very good in the playoffs. So, pressure getting hit to him, or just the team has kind of changed in front of him. No more Pietrangelo in front of you. That hurts. But this Blues team, I think, when I look at their roster up and down, if they can get average goaltending, they're a playoff team, especially adding Tarasenko. And I think that Saad and Buchnevich can make up for the loss of Jaden Schwartz and Mike Hoffman. I
agree.
Mike Hoffman, he can score goals, but I don't think he does a whole lot else. There's not a whole lot to his game besides going out there on the power play and putting up goals. He's decent, but I think that you're going to get more from a full hockey standpoint from Brendan Saad and Buchnevich. And I hope that the Blues, I hope that Buchnevich, I mean, if he can put up the numbers that he was putting up last year, which is he was basically on pace for like a 75-point season. And if he can do that, then the Blues are in great shape. Great shape.
Now, the big question for me is at what point do we see David Perron starting to slow down? Because at 33, I mean, he's still young enough and still fast enough he can produce. But, I mean, is he going to start slowing? I mean, I never saw this coming out of this guy a few years ago, and he's just been stellar since, I mean, again, he had that 1 year in Vegas, and I thought, okay, is this just an anomaly? And then he goes back to St. Louis, and I figure, okay, cool. He's not around the same team, the same people. He's going to fall off the wagon, and he just keeps it up right now. Is he the ageless wonder right now?
Yeah. I mean, 17-18, the year that he was with Vegas, where he put up 66 points. His best season before that was 5 years earlier when he put up 57 points. He's basically put up, if he were to have played a full season, he would have put up more than 60 points every single year. And last year, for the first time, he's more than a point per game player. It's like he just keeps getting better, which is crazy. He's kind of he's really been a bright spot for the St. Louis Blues, and I think that if you can get the same production, this team really could win this division. I mean, as good as Colorado is, and as healthy as the Stars appear to be coming into this season, and we'll get to the Jets, but as good as some of maybe the additions that the Jets made look on them, this St. Louis Blues team could be the best team still in this division. But at the same time, if certain players, i.e., like if Tarasenko, if this just goes totally sideways, it could train wreck the whole year. All it takes is the first 15 games for it to be weird and to lose a bunch of games. He's unhappy. The team's unhappy that he's there. You can't get rid of him. And there's this tons of drama. That's the worst case scenario. Best case, though, everyone kind of meshes together. They find their way. Ryan O'Reilly convinces Tarasenko to stick around, and the Blues go into the playoffs, one of the top 3 teams in the Central.
And maybe... again, Pavel Buchnevich, to me, is the X factor of this team because, one, yes, let's look at the production he had in New York and coming over for a second-round pick and a prospect for Sammy Bias. I think, again, he could fill in really, really good as far as that lost production from losing Hoffman, etc. But on the flip side, the X factor to me is the fact that he is also Russian, and Russian guys love being around other Russian players, especially big-name guys, right? So, again, Tarasenko, being a Russian, maybe him and Buchnevich hit it off. They form some sort of bond. Maybe they play on the same line together. They get some good chemistry, and now it's like all of a sudden, well, shoot,
you don't want to leave.
I like being around. Yeah, I don't want to leave now. I like this guy. I want to stay around. So,
yeah, it'll be interesting. I also like the 2 players that they've signed to PTOs, Michael Frolik and James Neal. If you can, if you like what you're seeing from like a James Neal, who, say what you want. I mean, he can. Put him in the right situation, I think that he could probably still score you 15 goals. Even on the fourth line, I think that you put the right people around him, and I think that he can be a decently productive player. I mean, 10 points in 29 games over the course of a full season, that's almost a 30-point season for James Neal. So I think that he has potential still to be effective in the bottom 6, and you never know with a guy who has hands like James Neal.
Yeah, and especially once it comes down to crunch time towards the end of the year, when you're rotating on guys to give guys rest, he would be a great guy to have, as like your 13th forward to just say, hey, let's rotate him in every, 3 or 4 games and give guys some rest.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's slide on over to the Winnipeg Jets, our last team in the Central Division. The Jets really the one player who leaves the Jets, Matthew Perreault, leaves for greener pastures, goes to Montreal. And however, they very much shore up their D. After, kind of 2 years of losing, you lose Jacob Trouba, you lose Dustin Byfuglien, and they haven't been able to do a whole lot to improve their D. And they definitely do that this offseason. They trade for Brendan Dillon. They get Nate Schmidt. And suddenly this defense looks like they could hold their own against the other teams in the Central. Maybe not the best D in the Central Division. That's the Central's strength is their D. And but at least they can compete. They're not going to get left behind in the Central anymore with their D. With Morrissey, Schmidt, Pionk, Dillon, DeMello making up 4 of your top 5 or 5 of your top 4. You can kind of slot a couple of those guys in where you want. But I like what I see from them now with those 2 additions.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think Nate Schmidt and Brendan Dillon are going to bring a little bit of grit, a little bit of defensive game to this back end where guys like Neil Pionk and Josh Morrissey can really excel from an offensive standpoint now, right? So Neil Pionk, to me, has been one of the most underrated defensemen in recent years. I mean, he's been looking very, very good for Winnipeg, and now he's got guys that can support him so he can produce, so he can be effective and maybe even more effective than maybe what he was last year. So to me, that's, again, I like this defense now. It looks a little bit better. I don't look at it and say, cringing my teeth. I can say confidently that, okay, cool, we've got something. There's a defense that this team can work with and really help out a guy like Connor Hellebuck, who to me has just been, their MVP for the last couple of years.
Yes, absolutely. He's like, I feel like Connor Hellebuck is your claim to fame. Like, you were telling me about Connor Hellebuck before he even played a game in the AHL. You were all about Connor Hellebuck. Yes. Does he return to the 920 plus save percentage? Because if he does, this team's going to be in phenomenal shape. Like,
yeah,
if he can have an even better year, where he's, I think that he's still in a position where he could potentially be a Vezina Trophy candidate. And it's really going to depend more so, what can they get from the backup position? Because Brossoit leaves Winnipeg, and they've got Eric Comrie, who is considered their backup goalie right now. He's only played 5 games in the last 3 years in the NHL. I mean, he's played no more than 3 games in any given season. He was on Winnipeg for 3 years, then Detroit, then New Jersey, and now he's back in Winnipeg. That's what worries me is, can they get the kind of production they need from the backup goalie? Because Connor Hellebuck, he's not going to play 70 games. He might have to play 60, 65, but I mean, the most he played 67 in 2017-18. I guess he played 45 last year out of 56. So that probably puts him somewhere in the 60 to 65 game range. But that means that, for about 20 games, you need to rely on someone who is very unproven. Like, are they going to do something? Do you think that they're going to go into the regular season with Eric Comrie as their goaltender, or is there some other solution here that we're missing?
You know what? I honestly think that they're going to ride those 2 guys, because really this team's in a cap crunch right now, and they really can't afford to go out and try to make a trade or bring somebody in. I think, maybe they can look at the free agent goaltending pool, and really the only name that stands out to me is maybe a Devin Dubnyk, right? You could bring him in as a backup.
Sure.
And I'm sure you can bring him in at a league minimum, which would, again, basically be that Eric Comrie contract, and then you can put him, send him down on waivers. And, what if he gets claimed? That's just a problem, obviously, you deal with. But at that point, I think you're not going out and getting Devin Dubnyk unless Eric Comrie isn't just cutting it as a backup. And then at that point, no one's going to claim him anyways. So to me, that's really the only solution for this team. If not, I think, you're definitely going to see Connor Hellebuck pushing between, an easy 65 games, I think, this year.
Yeah, it's a lot of games. And maybe the reason why, come playoff time, he was great this last year. There's been a couple times, well, I guess the year before he was just not good. But yeah, it's I think he can certainly handle the amount of games. But also, 28 years old, going to turn 29. And at what point playing more than 60 games a year, at what point does that catch up to you? We don't see too many guys who can do it for that long, like 5, 6, 7, 8 years. At what point does it catch up to you? That's maybe some of the question. Maybe having a shortened season last year helped them. might be a good thing. The other question I have is, Winnipeg is in this place now where I think you're looking at them and you want them to win, right? Like, this core doesn't have that much time left. Blake Wheeler's 35, Mark Scheifele's 28. It's Paul Stastny, you're bringing him in, he's 35. Some of your upper level guys are going to start to age themselves out. Like, how long can Blake Wheeler continue to be effective? He puts up almost a point per game. He's fantastic, but usually, now we're over 35. Like, he might have another good year, but is he going to have a point per game season at 36, at 37? Like, we're starting to get there. So these seasons have to be considered incredibly valuable and important to win for the Jets. So Kevin Cheveldayoff has been the GM forever, and Paul Maurice has been the head coach forever. Like, I think he's been the coach there since they became a team, right?
Yep.
So, and the same GM. So that's, at what point do we start to go, when do these guys actually, are they going to be held accountable for what they've done? No, Winnipeg had one coach before Paul Maurice. I don't remember who it was, but.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, I think Paul Maurice is definitely on the hot seat. He's been there for a while. Expectations have been, Stanley Cup final or bust really for this team, because they've been good enough on paper to compete. Obviously, I think last year you kind of saw them get exposed with Scheifele getting suspended. Obviously Pierre-Luc Dubois, I think, to me, is going to be the biggest question mark this year, because if he can get back to that 55, 60 point production, pace he had in Columbus, being their number one guy, and obviously he's going to be slotted in at their number 2 spot. If they can get that 50 to 60 point production out of him at that number 2 spot, I think this team will do all right. But again, he's an RFA, he's in a contract year, so I think he's definitely going to be playing for a long-term contract, because again, like you talked about, guys like Blake Wheeler, they've got to reload somehow, and I think you hope that Pierre-Luc Dubois is that answer for that second line center spot that they've been drastically missing for forever, basically.
Yeah, and Paul Stastny just isn't cutting it at the second line center so much. Like, he can do it, but you need someone else producing around him, I think.
Right.
Pierre-Luc Dubois, he's only 23, so there's certainly time for him to turn this around. And, you got to think last year was a really weird year, not only with COVID, but also the fact that, things are weird in Columbus in the start of the year. And then he gets dealt, and then you have to go into quarantine. And then, it just everything was weird. And I think this year will be better for him. The way that he played in the playoffs 2 years ago in the bubble against Toronto, when Columbus beat Toronto, I mean, I think that's the Pierre-Luc Dubois that everyone wants to see. Everyone knows it's in there somewhere. Like, it's not like he's aged out. That's in there somewhere. And so, can he get comfortable enough to play that way again? Because he could be one of the top two-way forwards in the NHL if he finds himself. But if not, then he is nothing more than like a really fast 35-point, 40-point player, who at $5 million is a little expensive. but if he can go and put up 55 points from the center position and be a potential number one center, especially if Scheifele goes down, then you're in a much better position. And Mark Scheifele has had some bad luck in the playoffs the last 2 years. Hasn't been able to finish the playoffs either year. So that certainly may be a reason why the Jets haven't been able to find themselves out of the first round since 2017-18. And this year, with the Central being pretty open outside of maybe Colorado, I think that this is got to be a year that Winnipeg pushes the pace and tries to really advance through the playoffs here too. But I do have a question about Hellebuck. I want to give you an over-under. My over-under is 68 games. What do you think? Over or under for Hellebuck? 68 games played.
Oh, jeez. You know what? I'm going to take the even on this one.
You're going to say 68 games dead on.
Yep. That's where I'm going. I think it's dead on.
Damn it. I should have said 67 and a half. So if I say 67 and a half, you're going over.
I'll take the over. Yep. Let's go. Let's take the over.
Okay. All right. 67 and a half. Anything else you want to hit on the Winnipeg Jets before we give our Central Division playoff predictions?
No, let's jump into it.
Okay. I want you to tell me who you think is going to be dead last in the Central.
All right. Dead last. Easy pick, I think. That's the Arizona Coyotes.
Okay, we're there. We're on the same page. Number 8, Arizona Coyotes. Number 7.
I'm going Nashville Predators.
Okay, going Nashville. I have to agree. I don't, what I said in the preview, that I just don't see them being the team that in the end makes the playoffs, and I think that they'll sell off, and that'll drop them a little bit.
Yep.
Okay. I feel like once you get rid of those two teams, it really becomes harder to make a good prediction here. But who do you have at number 6?
Yeah, it's really a crapshoot at that point, right? You could roll the dice and pick any one of these teams. You know what? Honestly, I'm going to throw it out there. This is going to be crazy. I don't think it'll happen, but I like the idea of this possibility just because I hate the contract. I'm going to say Minnesota finishes 6th.
Minnesota. So you think Kaprizov is going to take a step backwards?
Yeah, I don't think he plays as good as he does. I think, a lot of guys, obviously Joel Eriksson to me is a number 1 center. And so, Marco Rossi, I don't think he's ready for the show yet. So I think maybe this team takes a slight step back to where they were last year. And, hey, let's see them in 6th place. Now, I still think they're going to be right there on the bubble as far as maybe a point or two back from a 4th place, but it's going to be close, I think, the whole way.
Yeah, this whole division's probably going to be decently close. I'm going with the Dallas Stars in my 6th spot.
Okay.
I don't think that Pavelski, Radulov, Jamie Benn, I don't think that I think they're going to all take steps backwards. And as good as Sagan may be, I think that those steps backwards are going to hurt the Stars. And I don't think Braden Holtby is Braden Holtby. Ryan Suter is not going to be the minute muncher that he has been in the past. And losing Jamie Alexiak is going to hurt more than people expect. Okay. Although Ty Dellandrea will have a nice rookie season for the Stars. Nice. Okay, so they're my 6th. I'm going to put the Minnesota Wild at 5.
Okay.
Where I'm going to throw them.
I'll swap you then. I'm going to take Dallas.
Okay, which
5.
Doesn't necessarily mean, I think probably 5 teams from this division make the playoffs. So I think Minnesota is probably still a playoff team, but I think they'll be 5. They'll be right on the edge of glory here in the playoffs. But okay, so you'll put the Dallas Stars in at 5.
Yep.
All right, now who's your number 4? Well, I'll tell you my number 4.
Okay, go ahead.
For you. I am going to have to go with the St. Louis Blues at number 4. I think the beginning of the year is going to be weird with Tarasenko. And we're going to need to figure that out. Whether he stays or goes, things are going to need to be sorted. And I also think they're bringing in quite a few new top 6 players. That also can take time to sort things out.
Yep, I absolutely agree with you. They're my pick there as well.
All right, let's go number 3.
Number 3, I'm going to go Winnipeg Jets.
Winnipeg Jets. Okay. Winnipeg Jets. You're putting Chicago. You're banking on a Marc-Andre Fleury resurgence here, or another Vezina trophy, eh?
I do. I think Fleury and Seth Jones are going to completely change that back end. I think there's going to be a new attitude there. I think Jonathan Taves coming back, we don't know when, but I think eventually he'll be back sometime this year. And I think with the growth of some of those younger players in Chicago with that back end addition, I think it's just going to be just a resurgence as far as Chicago's concerned.
Okay. I'm going to go Winnipeg at 3, Chicago at 3, Winnipeg at 2, and then And then I think both our number ones are the Colorado Avalanche.
That's correct.
Tough not to put the Avalanche at number one.
Yeah, I mean, there are things that, you could look at Colorado and you could say losing a guy, depth, like, the goaltender, obviously, right? Brandon Saad not being there to provide some depth in that middle six. Nazem Kadri, who knows if he's going to, last the whole entire year. Same with Andre
he always lasts the
Burakovsky.
regular season. It's the playoffs that he can't keep his hands off people.
Yeah, I'll give you that. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, who knows? And again, are we still going to see, the same type of, production out of that back end that was just so good last year? I don't have a doubt that they're going to be just as good as last year, but obviously I think, Darcy Kemper coming in, is he going to be able to produce just like Grubauer did? Who knows? So
yes, and Cale Makar is going to be up for the Norris. That's how nasty he's going to be this year. He might put up.
Love it.
He might put up 80 points. He might be more than a point per game player. It'll be pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, since Carlson. There we go. I would love it.
Yes. Now, the crazy thing about this division is that outside of Colorado being one, which I think is, I'll never again say that anything is a lock. Because silly about the Flyers, and that didn't work out. I think you could see a scenario: Arizona last, Colorado first. Any one of the teams in between could slot anywhere from 2 to 7. Like, nothing would surprise me. If Nashville finished third, it wouldn't surprise me. If they finish, and maybe not last, but second to last to Arizona, it wouldn't surprise me at all. Winnipeg, I could see a scenario where they really struggle, and they just can't find their offense, and they falter, and they end up dropping way down in this division. Maybe not as far as 7, but if a couple things go wrong, things could go really strange in this division. But I think we're going to see some pretty good teams in the Central.
Well, look, you talk about the Jets, right? Things going wrong. All they need is Hellebuyck to get injured, right? And he's gone for the year. And this team is gone. See ya.
Although how many teams could go with their number one goalie getting out for the year early on and not really and have a hard time? Most teams will have a hard time,
right?
But very few teams have basically banked their entire season on one player the way that Winnipeg has banked it on Connor Hellebuyck. I will give you that. That is very true. Well, that's the Central Division. Let us know what you think. You can find us on Twitter at @OTHockeyTalk, as well on Instagram. And we'll jump into the Metropolitan Division next, part 1 and part 2, and then we'll finalize it with a fun in-person show for the full Atlantic Division. Justin, good job on the Central. And
to you as well, sir.
All right, and I'll talk to you soon.